Hi, I'm Michael Brown, curator of European art here at the San Diego Museum of Art. Today I'd like to welcome you to our special exhibition, Art and Empire, the Golden Age of Spain. And today I'll be talking about Francisco de Zurbarán and the painting behind me. Zurbarán was born in 1598 in a small town in a part of Spain called Extremadura. And this was a part of Spain that bordered Portugal and was mountainous and desert and very hot in the summer. And it wasn't exactly a hub for the artistic world at the time. Zurbarán's father sent him to Seville, which was just a short trip to the south from Extremadura. He sent him there when he was about 15 years old, and he apprenticed with an artist in Seville for 3 years before returning to Extremadura. And at that point, Zurbarán married, as most young artists would traditionally do, and he began his career. We don't know of many works that he did during this early time period, but we do know that, unfortunately, his first wife died after giving birth to their third child. Shortly after that, Zurbarán remarried, and he becomes a full citizen of Seville by 1626, when his first earliest dated works are discovered. By 1626, when his earliest work was documented. Zurbarán becomes the leading devotional painter in Seville during this part of the 17th century. And he had a long career that was characterized by the constant patronage of many of the religious institutions in and around Seville. Through his family connections, as well as both his first wife and second wife's families, he also had a number of connections with the Americas, both South America and North America, in the Viceroyalty of New Spain. And eventually, he would take advantage of these connections and export works of art to the Americas. And that's a story I'll come back to in just a minute. After he completed his first apprenticeship from around 1614 to 1617, he was still a very young man, he likely became friends with Diego Velázquez, who was also an apprentice at the same time in Seville in a different workshop. The two artists would be reunited a couple of times over their careers, but their friendship lasted for both of their lifetimes. And eventually, Zurbarán would relocate from Seville to the capital, where the royal court was, in 1658. And that's where he spent the final years of his life. He had spent quite a bit of time in Madrid earlier in his career, in the mid-1630s. And he had, with Velázquez's help, received a royal commission to participate in a very large artistic project at the Hall of Realms at the Buen Retiro, as part of the royal palace. And while Velázquez painted a number of portraits of the royal family, and most notably the heir, Prince Baltasar Carlos, for the Hall of Realms, Zurbarán was asked to complete a series of paintings for the 12 Labors of Hercules. And I think he probably thought that this would be his entree into a lucrative royal court position. That ended up not being the case. He returned to Seville, and again wasn't to return to Madrid until 1658. One of the reasons that he left Seville was the recurrence of the plague, which decimated the city and also took the life of Zurbarán's talented son, Juan de Zurbarán, one of the leading still life painters in Seville. This happened in the resurgence of the plague occurred between 1647 and 1652. And by 1658, there was, Zurbaran had relocated to Madrid to seek livelihood. He did very well in Madrid, and the masterpiece of his Madrid period is this painting of 1658, which shows the Virgin and Child with St. John the Baptist. And there are a number of delightful things about the painting, but it was also the subject of a year-and-a-half-long technical analysis and conservation treatment that was completed just before the opening of this show. So this is the re-debut of one of the star paintings in the collection of the San Diego Museum of Art. A little bit about the actual subject in the painting. We have the Virgin Mary dressed in traditional red and blue, the infant Jesus here being teased by his cousin St. John the Baptist, who's wearing the traditional fur cloth that he would later wear in adulthood. And what is St. John the Baptist doing? He's teasing his young cousin with a domesticated bird. It's a goldfinch tied on a string, and the goldfinch was a traditional symbol of the crucifixion, because the bird, the goldfinch itself, had a diet of thistle and thorn seeds, and according to legend, it landed on the crown of thorns during the crucifixion, and it there received a drop of blood, which remained on the species ever since. And you can see right here the red dot in the goldfinch's plumage. Other details, you can see that while the bird is an allusion to the crucifixion, you can see that the Virgin Mary remains completely serene as she watches this scene of the two toddlers very lovingly teasing one another. And the serenity on her face is indicative, and this is Zurbaran really at his finest, it's indicative of her total foreknowledge of what would happen to her son, and her willingness to accept that fate with great strength and complete serenity. She's also wearing something that is not very traditional in depictions of the Virgin Mary, which is this beautiful shawl, which is a very Spanish article of clothing, and it was worn like this around the shoulders. And this is a textile that would have come from the Condado de Niebla, which was an area in the hills outside of Seville, and would have been immediately recognizable to contemporary viewers of this picture. So Zurbaran transports this biblical scene into the contemporary Spanish and specifically Andalusian context. It's really one of Zurbaran's, and Velázquez for that matter, one of their geniuses is that they're able to connect on a very human level with contemporary audiences by making scenes recognizably Spanish. Now, to get back to the conservation of the painting, what had happened over the years was the varnish on the painting, on the top of the paint surface, had become very, very yellowed. And we have a history of conservation treatment, so we were able to figure out what materials were used, and also through a full range of technical analysis, including X-ray, infrared reflectography, magnified examinations, and so forth, in various types of light. We were able to figure out that the painting itself was in very good structural health. It was in very good condition. But the varnish was really hiding Zurbaran's palette. And so proceeding very methodically, painstakingly, our paintings conservator Alexis Miller at BACC, the Balboa Art Conservation Center, was able to begin removing this varnish. And even from the very first test cleaning spots, we were able to see that the palette that Zurburan used was quite different than earlier in his career. It was vibrant and warm, and also he had changed his technique when he arrived in Madrid, because what was happening there was a little bit different than what was happening in Seville. And so while he prepares his canvas with a red ground, he also covers that with a much whiter preparation. This is a very Flemish technique, and it gives an overall atmospheric to the painting that was quite different than his stark earlier works, which he painted in Seville, which are very sculptural and with a much cooler palette. Here we find, towards the end of his career, Zurburan finding a brand new style that he made all of his own, and in fact, it's we would kind of think that because of his connection to Velázquez, he also had access to the royal collection, where he could see paintings by Raphael, by Rubens, and in fact, his painting here is very reminiscent of a Raphael painting of the same subject that Velázquez himself was responsible for hanging in the royal palace. And you can just imagine the conversations that Velázquez and Zurburan would have had while walking through the royal collection together. I should say finally that during the course of the conservation treatment of the painting, we were also looking very actively for a frame for the painting. The painting had been in a 19th century imitation of a British late 18th century frame, which is a very long-winded way of saying that it was not an appropriate frame for the painting. What we wanted to find was a period Spanish frame, and although it took more than a year, we finally did find a frame at a dealer in New York, and the frame was resized to fit the painting, but it is a 17th century Seville frame, and it looks much more appropriate, and the Zurburan is happy in this frame. And all the conservation and the reframing were all thanks to the generosity of one of our Circle donors here at the museum. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope to welcome you back to the San Diego Museum of Art very soon.